If you follow me on TikTok, then you've probably already seen me make this style of bag a lot. I really like this style, it's really easy to make, and the pattern is so simple as well. You guys always ask me for tutorials, so I figured I'd finally make one that is quick and easy to follow along. The first step is to make the pattern, so the first thing I like to do is just fold the piece of paper in half. I start with a just standard normal sheet of paper. You can also use wrapping paper or just any spare paper that you have lying around. I also go ahead and cut 2 inches off the shorter end, so the dimensions are now 6.5 by 11 inches. After that, I just sketch out the bag to the best of my ability. I typically just do it on half of the paper, so that after that I'll just cut out that side and then trace the other side to match it. This way you can ensure that it's going to be symmetrical and even on both sides. At this point, you're going to want to take out your fabric, but this part is pretty self-explanatory. All you have to do is take your pattern and trace it on your fabric and then cut it out to match. I know a lot of people also pin the pattern to the fabric instead of tracing it, but I found it's a little bit easier to cut exact when you trace it, so that's the way that I've been doing it. For the base and side piece, I don't actually use a pattern. I basically measure it out every single time. I've just found it's been easier for me this way. So you take your tape measure and measure around your bag. For me, it came to about 23 inches. So I ended up adding an inch to that just so that I can have some extra safety allowance just in case for some reason that measurement was slightly off. I also make the width about 4 inches, so that kind of depends on how wide you want your bag to be, but 4 inches is typically the standard that I use. I also like to mark the halfway point of all my pieces just because it makes it easier to line up when I'm pinning in the future. From the halfway point of that bottom / side piece, you're going to want to measure 5 inches out so that from the middle each way you've measured 5 inches, so you'll make 4 marks on your fabric, and then you're going to take the end and you're going to mark 2 inches in the center of it. So mark the halfway point and then 1 inch on either side of that. I hope that explanation kind of made sense. It's kind of hard to describe it exactly, but if you try to follow along visually, that's probably your best bet. I'm not the best at explaining things, hence why I don't make tutorials, but this is kind of what it should look like, and then you just cut it out and you'll have your base piece complete. Now for the strap, I typically make it 2 inches wide, and the length really depends on how long you want the strap. My straps honestly vary on every single bag. I usually change it up based on how I'm feeling in that moment, but this one I think ended up being around 25 or 26 inches, but those are all the exterior pieces of the bag. I typically like to add a lining to my bag, so I use usually 100% cotton black fabric, and I just make the same exact cuts and same exact sizes for the base piece and also the front and back panel. Now that all the fabric is cut, we're going to start clipping the bag together. So take one of the front or back panels and the base panel and start pinning it together the same way that you see I'm doing here. Make sure you line up the centers at the markings that you made earlier so that it's even all around. Now you're just going to sew along that edge, but make sure at the ends you do leave a little bit of room so that you can fold over the front panel when we're inserting the lining. It should end up looking something like this. Go ahead and pin the back panel the same exact way that you pinned the front panel. Make sure the centers are lined up, and it should look something like this. Again, just sew the same exact way you did the front panel, leaving a little bit of room at either end so that you can fold over that side when we're doing the lining. Once you've sewn both sides on, it should look something like this, and your exterior part of the base is now complete. Before we move on, you're going to want to flip that bag right side up and then save it for later. It'll look something like this at this point. Now take your lining fabric and pin it the same exact way you did with the regular exterior fabric. It's going to be a little flimsier just because lining fabric typically is, but sew it in the same manner, pin it in the same manner, and it should end up looking pretty much identical to the other piece that you made, except thinner and flimsier. Now that you have both of the main bodies complete, you're going to want to take the lining piece, keep it the same exact way it was when you finished sewing it, and insert it into the exterior piece. After that, you're going to tuck in the lining so that it is tucked underneath the exterior pieces. So you're going to fold over whatever your exterior fabric is and fold it over the lining so that it's covered and it's a clean finish. Before we sew any of that piece, we're going to first make the strap. So you're going to go ahead and pin it the same way I'm doing here. You're just going to fold over each end of it so that they meet in the middle. I typically use D-rings for my straps, but I was out, so I decided to make this bag without them. You still sew the strap the same way, which is doing 2 straight stitches, 1 on either side. Then you're going to take this strap and clip it to one of the sides of the bag and sew it in place, and then once that is sewn in place, you're going to do the same exact thing with the other side of the bag. You're going to want to take your zipper and get that ready. I typically go for a zipper that is as close to the length of my bag as possible, but if anything, you're going to want one that's longer. Definitely do not go for one that's shorter because it's very difficult to sew in place. Leaving the zipper closed, you're going to want to clip it to one of the sides in the same way that you see I did, and then just sew that in place with a straight stitch. It should end up looking something like this. Next thing you're going to do is open the zipper and then clip it to the other side and make sure it's even and lined up so that it's not lopsided. It's a little more difficult to pin this part correctly because you do have the closed end, but pin it as close as possible and then sew the bag same way you did the other side, but just be very careful when you get towards the end. You might not be able to sew it all the way, so in that case you will have a little bit left over. I normally sew the end of it in place by hand, but I was a little bit lazy today, so I kind of just tucked it in, but I do recommend sewing it by hand if you're up for it. So this is the finished product. I think it looks pretty cute, and I really like how it turned out. Let me know what you guys think, and I hope you like this tutorial. Thanks for watching, and follow me on TikTok. Bye guys!